This is the fifth video for naming ionic and polyatomic compounds, and like the previous video, we're looking at isolated skills or steps that are necessary in doing this sort of thing. And we're going to do four examples here to emphasize the idea that after you've checked to see if the metals, like these guys here, have multiple charges, and they do, and we find that out from using this sheet here. After you've checked that the metals have multiple charges, what do you have to do in reversing the crisscross to figure out ultimately what Roman numerals to put beside the metal when you're writing the name? We're not going to go through that entire process here, but just one kind of a couple steps to help you get to there. So when we look at iron, chloride here, FeCl2, we'll notice that we can put a 1 there because it's understood to be there. We already know that iron gets multiple charges from the sheet that I just showed you. You're supposed to reverse the crisscross, and when you do that, you get Fe positive 2, so that 2 came up and got us the positive 2 charge. Chlorine, the 1 comes up and we get a charge of negative 1. And what you're supposed to do is check to see if the charge on the nonmetal is correct or not. So when we find chlorine, we see a charge of negative 1. So that's right. We don't have to do anything else for this guy, at least at this point. Titanium oxide, again, let's write the 1 there and reverse the crisscross. And what we get is titanium positive 2 and O negative 1. Let's check the charge on the nonmetal, which is the oxygen. And when we do that, we see that oxygen gets a charge of negative 2. Well, that's not right. So at this point, you put brackets around it, and then you're supposed to do something else, which is multiply the numbers inside by something to get the charge on the nonmetal right. We won't do that at this point. Let's do a couple other ones. Titanium phosphate. So again, put a 1 there because the 1 is understood to be there, and reverse the crisscross. Now what's dangerous here is for students to take that 4 and bring it up. But remember, this is phosphate, PO4, so we treat this thing as one object, and we actually have one of these phosphates, one of the phosphates. So we're not moving the 4, we're moving the 1 because we have one of them. So our charge is now going, or our charges are now going to be Ti positive 1 and PO4. 1 comes up, negative 1. We check to see if phosphate actually does get a charge of negative 1. And when we look at this periodic table here, we see that phosphate gets a charge of negative 3. So we put brackets around it. And again, ultimately what we're going to do is put a number outside here to get those charges right. Then finally we've got vanadium sulfate, again unwritten 1 there, reverse the crisscross, and what we get is V positive 2, that 2 came up, that 1 goes to the sulfate, so now it's SO4 negative 1. Well, let's check to see if sulfate actually does get a charge of negative 1. Let's find it. There's SO4 negative 2 sulfate. Well, this is wrong, so we put brackets around it. And again, what we're going to try and do next is change those numbers so that the charges there are correct, just like we did for phosphate and the oxygen here.